Hey guys, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I'm Cameron Bertuzzi, joined today by Joe Marino, who is a syndenologist, which is basically a short term for, or a long term, I guess, for an expert on the Shroud of Turin. That's what we're talking about today. We're taking your calls. If you have objections to the Shroud of Turin, if you think it's a forgery, if you think it's real, this is your chance to call in and speak directly, one-on-one, with a real-life syndenologist. Joe Marino's written books. He's defended. We even had him on last week to respond to the sort of carbon dating issue in response to the Shroud, which is basically one of the primary reasons that people give to doubt the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin is this carbon dating that happened back in the 80s. And so we did a very deep dive into that subject. If you guys are interested, go watch that interview. Tons and tons of really awesome information in that interview if you guys are interested. So yeah, go check that out. But as we're starting the show today, we're inviting callers onto the show to join us, and it seems so far like people are scared. People don't want to join. People don't want to talk to Joe and express their doubts. I don't know what the actual reasons are. Maybe this topic just isn't really interesting to the callers today, but we're inviting you guys. Please come on and join. The link is in the description of this video. If not, then we're just going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin the whole time, which I'm totally okay with, by the way. Joe is like just a wealth of knowledge on this topic. So let's dive in. Let's just talk about the Shroud for a little while as we wait for callers to join, which I'm very confident we will have callers at some point. Let's talk about your reasons, Joe, for thinking that the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus. If you want to, we can get into the carbon dating stuff later on, but let's talk about, give me like a detailed explanation. Why do you think the Shroud of Turin is authentic?
Well, it should be stated up front that the Shroud is probably the most intensely studied artifact in human history in terms of the number of person hours spent on it. I know I read many years ago that the 1978 Shroud of Turin research project, which spent 5 days around the clock studying the Shroud and did non-destructive testing, it was estimated, gosh, this was probably close to 30 years ago, had spent approximately 250,000 hours analyzing the data that they collected. Their final report was done in 1981. And of course, individually, they all continued, some of them at least, continued some research. And other researchers, other shroud organizations have picked up the mantle somewhat and have also spent countless hours studying the shroud. And nobody has, to this day, nobody has figured out how the image got on the shroud. So a succinct answer is, why do I think it's authentic? It's because it's the combination of all the evidence that I've looked at for the past 47 years. The fact that it's too complicated for a medieval artist to probably have done it. I don't see how he could do it with the technology available back then. And I think that there's a good chance, we could never prove it 100%, that it probably is authentic. There's some interesting characteristics to both the image and the blood that suggests that the image was formed in a not completely natural way. And anybody that's open to the supernatural, I think, has to be open to the possibility that the simplest answer in this case, which is a well-known thing in science, is it's called Occam's razor, which basically boils down to the idea that the simplest answer is usually the correct one. And I think in the case of the shroud, if you apply Occam's razor, the simplest answer to explain all the phenomena and data that has been collected for the past 125 years is that it's actually the burial cloth of Jesus and is probably connected with whatever, it's connected somehow with the resurrection. And obviously, you can't duplicate a resurrection in a laboratory, so you can't prove it. Science requires repeatability. We're never going to have another image on a shroud like this. So science can really only take you so far, but you can apply many disciplines. I think I did an article, and how many? There were about 105 different disciplines that I found that have been used on the shroud since 1898, and I just find it uh, too unbelievable to think that there was some medieval artist out there that was proficient in over 100 disciplines to the degree that he was able to fool intelligent 20th and 21st century scientists, researchers, doctors, surgeons, on and on. So, um, I've been, everybody should try to disprove their own theory. But I look at all the evidence and the combination. What's often the phrase is often the preponderance of the evidence. To me, suggests that it's the real McCoy.
All right, let's do this while we're waiting for callers to come in, which someone in the live chat actually noted that there's a passcode that's required to join, and I put that passcode now in the live chat and also in the description of the video. The passcode is just all lowercase truth, so just type that in when you click the link in the description to join, and you'll be taken directly to our call vetter, who will then put you guys in the queue to join the show. It looks like we are having some people call in. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and switch now to some super chats. We did receive a super chat from Yeshua the King, and this one is on David Falk's recent critique of the Shroud of Turin, which I don't know if you're familiar with David Falk, Joe, but he's Egyptologist, and he's got a very interesting YouTube channel. But this super chat says, thoughts on David Falk's critique saying the body is 9 heads tall, but humans are usually 7 to 8 heads tall.
Yeah, that was making the rounds, and there were some. I can't remember if it was an article or a YouTube response to that, and people did find fault with his measurements. He's the only one that ever came up with that. It's, to be honest, it's been quite a while since I've seen that material, and I don't remember really any specific details, but other people have refuted that his contention that it is 9 heads tall,
or that the proportions are off. Isn't that like a kind of a common objection to the shroud? Is that the proportions just seem a little bit strange?
I've seen some people say that the arms are too long.
The legs are too long.
The fingers are too long, and the fingers can be explained by the fact that some people think that at least part of the image formation process is like an X-ray, and so we're actually, what looks to be like two long fingers are really you seeing the bones, beneath the skin.
Mm-hmm.
The one of the doctors that had studied the shroud in the 80s, Dr. Frederick Zugaby, had postulated at one point in his first book that Jesus had Marfan's disease, which I think Abraham Lincoln might have had, which is like a abnormally long limbs or something like that. But he backed away from that in his second book and didn't mention it again. But the people that really know anatomy, I'm talking the doctors and surgeons, people that know the proportions, anatomists and whatnot, they find no problem with the image. Even somebody as early as 1902, Yves Delage, who was a French agnostic, and he believed the shroud was authentic. He was an anatomist, and he found nothing wrong with it. And I've got a list of another article of all the doctors and surgeons that think the shroud's authentic, and it's dozens and dozens and dozens, and very few, if any, have said that there's problems with the anatomy. And you also have to remember that we're looking at the body image not directly, but on a cloth, so you get there's the stretching issues and that sort of thing. The cloth can be stretched. And so it's not as simple as just measuring some things on the shroud and extrapolating that, or imposing data from that as if you were measuring the body directly. The fact that it's been in a cloth makes a difference in these measurements.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. It seems like a pretty common response to these is that when it comes to like this is got to remember that this is a cloth that was covering a body, and so the dimensions of it and stuff might seem a little bit strange given that fact. And then there's also the question of how did the image actually get on the cloth, depending on the way that it was wrapped and stuff. We don't know how it got on the cloth, and so that I think can also come into play as well. But let's go ahead and take another super chat, and then we'll get in our first caller. First caller's already lined up. His name is Zach. He's a Christian. He's got some. He says he wants to play the role of a skeptic. So we'll pull him in here in just a second. So from Rebecca Lynn says, "Is this the same shroud as the one in Spain on Camino del Norte?"
I'm not familiar with Camino del Norte, but the shroud has been in Turin since. No, the answer would have to be no, because it's been in Turin since 1578, and the only time it left there was for a few short years during World War II, because it was known that Hitler wanted to get his hands on it. So they moved it, I think actually before the war started. I want to say in 1938 maybe, and then it was moved to a Benedictine monastery in the mountains near Rome. And it stayed there until 1946 when it was brought back to Turin. So I'm not familiar with a shroud in Camino del Norte. Now in Spain, there is a face cloth called the Sudarium of Oviedo, which is believed to be the face cloth mentioned in John chapter 20, verses 6 and 7, that they found in the tomb apart from the shroud. And that's been there. We've got a constant history of that since about 611, which goes way back now. Before that, the history is a bit murky. And interestingly, there's a lot of correspondence of the blood stains. There's no image on the Sudarium of Oviedo, just blood stains and other fluid stains. And some researchers that have studied the shroud have also studied the Sudarium and believe that they wrapped the same man. And if that's true, that's a pretty important point, because since the Sudarium has been there since 611, if in fact it wrapped the same man as the man in the shroud, that also invalidates or skews the validity of saying that the shroud was dated to 1260 to 1390. If it wrapped the same man and we have a history from 611, the shroud would have to go back to 611, which puts the carbon dating off by at least 600 years just on that point alone.
Okay, so now we're to pull in our first caller. Okay, I've asked him to unmute. He just did unmute, so let's go ahead and pull him in. His name is Zach, Zachary. Is that correct? Is it Zach? Yes.
Zach. Sorry, Zach works.
I see Zach
or
on
Yoder,
Zoom, but
whatever you want to call me. I'm a teacher, okay. So I usually go by my last name, so.
Okay, gotcha. Well, this is so you're a Christian, right? Playing the role of a skeptic. What's going on?
Yeah, so I was going to come in here and actually ask about the finger length, but that just got covered while I was waiting. So I got a couple more challenges for you, though, Joe.
Yeah.
So because I'm a teacher and I'm a teacher at a private school, one of the things I do is, of course, teach religion. And during religion class, I cover things like the Shroud of Turin. For me as a Catholic, Eucharistic miracles, things of that nature, because my students are very interested in, like we all are, physical evidence, especially in an age of kind of scientism or hyper-rationalism like today. That's why I think the Shroud of Turin is so important. But there's also a couple challenges that my students offer and that I kind of offer when I think about the Shroud. And that includes when we look at the pollen analysis on the Shroud, let's take that as an example. Couldn't that, while it's used as evidence, couldn't that be the case that it's just caused by cross-contamination with other artifacts?
Well, the Shroud has been in contact with artists' copy. We know copies that they made. And I imagine they've come from long distances, some of them, although uh, I would imagine, given the difficulty of travel in those centuries, most of them were probably closer to um, the area where the shroud was when they tried to sanctify their copy, and it would becomes like a second class relic. Um, the pollen analysis, they've found some pollens on the shroud that are specifically restricted to an area very close to the Dead Sea and Jerusalem. Um, and pollen can also be carried by wind, but the pollen experts seem to think that there's also some indication that it's the some of the ointments found on the shroud were used in burials in the Middle East. So the original guy that did the first pollen research was Dr. Max Frey from the Swiss, the Zurich police. And he did a lot of research, but unfortunately died in 1983 before he was able to publish anything. And some other paleontologists have picked up his work. Um, there's there was a recent a botanist at Hebrew University, the late Dr. Avinoam Danin, and he swore that the shroud had numerous pollens and remnants of flowers and different things from the Jerusalem area. In fact, he wrote a whole book, which I would recommend if you're interested in the pollen. It's called The Botany of the Shroud of Turin. He was Israel's foremost uh, botanist, and the booklet is called Botany of the Shroud of Turin. His last name is Danin, Danin. First name is Avi Noam. And I think the book is probably still available, possibly on Amazon, or should be able to find it anywhere, somewhere
Okay.
online. So I would recommend that. There's pollen research is some people have backtracked a little bit on it, and like I say, Max Frey died early, and a lot more work needs to be done. But I think it's one piece of the puzzle, certainly an important one, and I hope further research will be done. There's also an excellent researcher in Spain named, I think it's Marza, Marzia, and her last name is, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Boi. Very simple last name, and she's been presenting um, some papers on the shroud at various conferences recently, and I know one or two of her articles are available online, either on shroud.com or possibly academia. Or, there's one or two other sources, but if you do a Google search on her, but put her name in and shroud, um, you should be able to find some couple articles from her as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Um, and then there's also like dirt analysis, right? They found like limestone on the shroud. Is that true?
Yes, yeah, limestone that's found in Jerusalem. Sometimes depending on who the author, when they write about that, they will say it's exclusively limited to Jerusalem. Some skeptics will say, "Oh no, you can find limestone like that in other areas." But it
Yeah.
does. There was a former archaeologist, Middle Eastern archaeologist named Dr. Damian Natowski, and she did some experiments in a tomb in Jerusalem in 1986, and had a chemist named Joseph Kolbeck with her, and they tried to do some image formation experiments to see how it possibly could have been formed. And I think I'm pretty sure they found limestone as well, but other
Mm.
researchers later than their research in 1986 um, found some as well. But if you want to look up, her last name is Nitowski, Nitowski. Her first real name was Eugenia. She also went by Sister Damien of the Cross. She was a Carmelite nun for a while. But those sorts of things, I think, they're not foolproof. I mean, you get skeptics, on any aspect of the shroud, really. But the pollen and limestone, those chemical signatures, I think, are very important, especially if you could link them to Jerusalem. And now, just this isn't on pollen or limestone, but just as another example, the there's a sewing technique that was discovered on the shroud that matches to a cloth that was found at Masada that was destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D. and the sewing technique found on that Masada cloth is also found on the shroud. Now, again, I don't know if you want to say that's 100% proof that. I don't think you could say that proves alone that the shrouds from the first century. So maybe other people in the first century in other locales could have done that as well. But there's a lot of clues that seem to point toward Jerusalem. And then I think when you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, you have to ask, all right, when you have 20 pieces of data that point towards something, are you going to try to come up with ad hoc explanations of why it can't, why it's not pointing to a Jerusalem origin? I mean, you can people can play all sorts of intellectual games with data, but if you look at the overall picture, to me, everything is suggesting a Jerusalem origin.
Yeah, to me, the main objection I've heard is just cross-contamination, right? That it's been around a lot of stuff, so it's bringing in all that pollen, all that dirt from other things. So that's, I know, the main objection to that. But as you're saying, you can find, I guess, reasons to doubt it, right? No matter what. So, and then I have another.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm wondering about the lashes on the shroud. So I've heard a lot of varying numbers regarding to the lashes on the man on the shroud. I think as low as around 100 and as many as 300, I believe.
Yeah.
So how would you respond if someone said that those numbers are wildly inconsistent and that
right.
it just goes to show that, there's not enough solid evidence on the man? Like we don't even know how many lashes are on him.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to that is that the fact that the Roman flagrum usually had 3 straps, so one lash would give you 3 marks. So I think some of the researchers are talking about the number of lashes, and some of them are talking about the specific marks made by the three-pronged metal or bone that was attached to the stick that they use. So I think that's basically the difference in the discrepancy.
I got you. Okay.
All right, Zach, thanks for calling in. We're going to go ahead and turn now to other callers, but I definitely appreciate you coming in, and enjoy your summer off if you are off during the summer. You said you were a teacher.
Yes, so. I am. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for calling in. Thanks for your questions. All right, let's turn now to some more super chats. We've got one from Truth Seeker. Let me go ahead and pull it up on the screen here. What do you believe is the best scientific method for dating a relic?
Well, there are some new non-destructive methods, but there's this Italian scientist named Giulio Fonte who's been working on some new methods, and he's been involved with actually 4 different ones related to the chemical degradation of fibers, and a new one called wide angle X-ray scattering. Most Other scientists don't believe that those are proven well enough yet to give it too much validity. But the 4 dates combined, he came up with an average of something like 220 BC to 220 AD. And of course, the first century would fall right in the middle of that. Carbon 14, I don't think is as reliable as a lot of people think. If all the conditions are right, it can give an accurate date, but even then, scientists don't use that as a standalone test. That's just sort of a misconception. I think I mentioned in the last broadcast that the shroud just wasn't really a good candidate.
Did it freeze up again? It looks like your camera froze up again. I think the only thing that worked last time was to have you leave and then come back. So let's try that, unfortunately.
Okay.
All right, guys. He just left, and he will be joining us in just a second. By the way, we do have someone else lined up, another caller who has a sticking point. He's a Christian, but he says, why is the shroud not mentioned in the writings of the Apostolic Church Fathers, which we'll be getting to that in just a few minutes. And then we do have a skeptic actually lined up as well that wants to talk about carbon dating. So let's go ahead and try to pull Joe back in. 1 second. Let me see if I can get him back with us. What's going on? This is not the way that this is supposed to look. 1 second, everyone. Looks like I'm having a technical issue. Yeah, Joe, I'm not seeing your camera, unfortunately. So let's try it again. Unfortunately, try to back out and then come back in. Man, these technical issues are the best. I love them. We'll wait for him to come back in. But as I was mentioning, we do have an atheist or an agnostic coming in. His name is Chuck. He wants to talk about the carbon dating. All right, let's see if we can get Joe now. Okay, there we go. I think we've got him. Let's try to pull him back in. All right, there we go.
All right. I think we're back.
All right, you are back. Let me just try. Do you remember where you were before we had to?
Let's see. I was talking something about C14.
You said it's not as reliable.
It's yeah. Even when scientists do use it, they don't use it as a standalone, and they look at other data. So, and I was saying the shroud itself was not a good object to carbon date in the first place because we know the history back to 1355, thereabouts, a year or two, either way. And then it's been in, it's been in Turin since 1578, which has a lot of pollution, and it's been exposed outdoors, over 250 times, and it's been handled in that corner. It's probably been repaired in that corner. So it just, it was a no-win situation to date the cloth, because even if it had come out first century, a skeptic would have said, and one of the skeptics admitted in print he would say this before the test, that a medieval forger simply got a first century cloth. So again, that's part of the intellectual games. I mean, you can, if you want to say the shroud's a fake, you can find something to disprove all the evidence that's out there. So
yeah.
I don't know if there's any one of the best of the new dating techniques. I think we have to give all 4 of them time and wait for get a little better consensus from the scientific community saying, okay, these methods are more accurate. But in case of the shroud, I think there's a ton more evidence. I don't think any one specific dating test should be the end all and be all. I think, again, it comes down to me as the preponderance of the evidence, and there's every angle that you can look at, apart from the carbon 14 and a weak history before 1357. all the other evidence seems to be pointing toward authenticity. So, yeah, I mean, dating is not it's not unimportant, but it's not the end all and be all.
All right, let's do one more super chat before we take the next caller. This one's from Casey O, $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Casey. It's a big help to the channel and to the ministry so that we can keep doing what we're doing here. Have you gentlemen ever seen The Prince of Peace or Jesus paintings by Akian Kramerick? She said that the paintings had 80 to 90% accuracy with the shroud. Some people who have even had NDEs claim these paintings were the closest thing to Christ's face.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. I have seen that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can discount when people have these sorts of visions or whatever. It is amazing. I mean, I never went through the trouble of documenting. My friend Russ Braille that I mentioned to you, I think before we started recording, he's going to be doing an article, I think, on NDEs, and he'll probably be doing a comprehensive treatment of people that claim to have seen Jesus. But I've read stories throughout the years of people that even weren't familiar with the shroud, and they'd have a vision of Jesus, and then they'd later see the shroud and they go, oh my gosh, that's the guy I saw in my vision. So there are stories out there like that, and in fact that actually my late wife was one of those that really came into that category where she had a vision of Jesus before she was familiar with the shroud, and when she saw the shroud she said, oh, that's the guy I saw. So
wow. Yeah, okay, let's turn now to our next caller. This guy's name is Eric, and as I mentioned, he has a question about why doesn't the shroud really pop up in the writings of the early church fathers. Let's go ahead and pull him in now. So Eric, what's going on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Cameron. Hi, Joe. Pleasure to be here.
Hi.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, no, I am about 90% convinced the shroud, convinced in regard to the shroud being authentic. But my question is, if the shroud is authentic, my assumption is that for the apostles, for the early church, for the apostolic era, it would sort of be a receipt to confirm, like a physical receipt, this sort of miracle cloth. If that was the case, why is it not mentioned as often as I would assume it would be if the early church believed it was authentic, I guess is the point. As someone who has read the apostolic era myself, I did not find it really popping up in those writings, if that makes sense. So that would be my main question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. The history is one of the more problematical areas of the shroud. There's been tons of research in that, because obviously if the shroud's authentic, you have to have at least a reasonable history of the shroud. Now, I always like to point out that, whatever object you see in a historical museum and they say this dates back to such and such, it's unlikely that most of the objects you find in museums have a second by second history attached to it where you could trace it back every second of the time. In the case of the shroud, you would expect something more significant in the writings. Now, if you still go back to the beginning with the apostles, you have to remember that the shroud would have been considered an impure object. It wrapped a dead man. There was blood on it. They couldn't have come out of the tomb with the cloth, waving it, and say, "Look what we found," because the Romans and the Jews would have killed them for different reasons for having the shroud. So there was something in the church. You might want to do a search on this later. It was called the discipline of the secret. And that was because the Christians were being persecuted so much in general, not just about, what relics they might have. They really had to write somewhat in code. And if you look at some of the biblical writings, there's phrases like, I cannot say more about this here. And some authors think that there's code words for various things so that people on the inside would know what they're talking about, but yet they would keep it secret from people that would be seeking to harm them or destroy them. So there's a real good article by the late Episcopal priest, the late Reverend Kim Dreisbach. If you go to shroud.com, there's a search engine there, and it only searches on shroud.com. You won't get a million other hits from other areas. And I would encourage you to put in the term "discipline of the secret," and Dreisbach's article and a few others will probably come up. And the other important thing to say about the early history is that if the shroud existed in the early days, it could have been known under different names. One of the biggest theories, and I'm not saying this is the only one because there are many, some researchers believe that the shroud was known as the image of Edessa from about the 6th century. And then that was taken to Constantinople in 944. And from that point, it became known as the Mandylion. And then it was in Constantinople till 1204, when it was probably sacked during the Fourth Crusade. And then it ended up in Lorraine, France in the 1350s. So it's very possible that before the 6th century, it might have been hidden in the walls of either Antioch or Edessa, depending on who you read. So there's a plausible reason for it not being mentioned much, and then the people that did have possession would have kept it close to the vest. So other people might not have known about it, especially in the first 500 years. And that's when most of the church fathers wrote. So if it was hidden in some city walls for 500 years and the church fathers didn't know about it, that would pretty well explain why they didn't write about it. But I do have references in an article of references in history, documented references to not specifically the shroud, but I termed the title of my article has the word, it's like documented references to the burial cloths of Jesus between the first or the second and the first half of the 13th century. So it's very possible that the shroud existed. It was known under different names, and in the very early centuries was just probably hidden to the degree that the church fathers weren't even aware that it existed at that point.
Eric, I wanted to say that's actually a really good question. It's actually one of my reasons for thinking that or having some doubts about the authenticity of the shroud. Like it just seems a little bit too convenient that there's not as much.
Sure.
There.
Yeah,
in history,
I do have a follow-up, if that's okay, to the points that he was making. I have wondered I believe it's in Galatians 2 or Galatians 3, Paul says something to the effect of, he's speaking to the Galatians and he says, it was before your eyes. Right. I don't know if you mentioned this already. It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly exhibited as crucified. And I've always wondered, the Galatians they were nowhere near the crucifixion. This is decades later. They were nowhere near the crucifixion site, if that makes sense. So what is he referring to is, I guess, my main question. And I've wondered, could it be he's referring to something like the shroud?
Absolutely. That's a big topic in syndenology, whether that specific passage, and it's Galatians 3:1. And a lot of the translation you gave was, you before whose eyes Jesus was publicly portrayed as crucified. Right, I mean, to me, that sounds like he's talking about something visual. And biblical exegetes for years have been trying to figure out what he was talking about. And again, Occam's razor to me suggests that he's talking about a visual representation of something. And certainly the shroud would fit the bill. Now the question is, would Paul or Peter taken it there? Very possibly. Peter was believed to have ministered to the Galatians before Paul wrote that letter. And Peter was rumored to have had the shroud. early on. So perhaps Peter had brought the shroud with him, concealed, folded up so that it was easier to carry because the shroud's a long cloth. Perhaps he showed them the shroud, and then Paul met with Peter, James, and John in Jerusalem a couple times. Peter might have discussed the fact that he brought the cloth to Paul, and Paul might have said, "Hey, the cloth, this representation was shown to you, because you're right. In 50 A.D., none of those people would have been present at the crucifixion." So, there's some skeptics who say no, it couldn't have gotten there, but I've been hearing papers and presentations on that for a good 30 years or more on that. So that's a good question. I personally think it's possible. I'm not going to say for sure that um, that it was the shroud that he's referring to, but I think there's a very good possibility that it could have been. It's a good question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah, if you permit me one more, or no?
Yeah, we do have time. Let me mention real quick though, before you do that, is that this is a call-in show. If you guys have any questions or you'd like to raise objections to Joe, just call in. We've got a link in the description of the video. There's a little passcode you got to enter. It's just all lowercase truth. So enter that in, but we are looking for more callers. We've got one guy lined up. His name is Chuck. He hasn't joined yet, but hopefully he does join. He's got some questions on radiocarbon dating. So yeah, please call in. We'd love to chat with you guys. All right. Yeah. What's your last question?
My very last one would be, is it legitimate? Would you say that it's legitimate to draw a connection or a line between the image on the shroud, the face in particular, to the Sinai icon? Now, I've heard about this, that there's kind of a congruency between the asymmetry of the Sinai icon that is a very, it's like 6th century, I think, a very early one in reference to icons of Jesus, and the asymmetry of the face of the shroud. And just another thing that I've heard about that I've wondered if that's authentic in your opinion, to kind of draw that connection.
Yes. I keep on mentioning these researchers, and now I have to put the phrase the light in front of them, because a lot of the old time shroud researchers that were prominent when I first started have been dying left and right, including unfortunately my good friend Barry Schwartz, who ran Shroud.com and was the documenting photographer for the 1978 Shroud of Turin research project. He just died like a week and a half ago. But there was a shroud researcher, the late Dr. Alan Wanger, Wanger, and he did a lot of work on that Pantocrator icon from Mount Sinai, and he strongly believed that image was based on the shroud. So for that, again, I write, if you go to shroud.com and put in Pantocrator and maybe add Wanger's name, you'll see what he wrote, or just put in Pantocrator and you'll see other references, and his should be listed there as well. But I think there's a very good chance that based on the amount of points of congruence, meaning points of similarity, that that was based on the artist having seen the shroud in the 6th century.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and permitting me these questions. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Eric. All right.
All right.
Let's do this. Let's turn now to some more super chats. We've got one from AE. Can DNA be pulled or found in the blood from the lashes on the shroud? Have they tried to investigate that?
There was some DNA taken from a blood sample from the back of the head back in 1995. But DNA analysis, for one thing, we don't have Jesus's original DNA on file. And secondly, the DNA has been so degraded that any results are going to be questionable at best. It's just, and other people have touched the shroud, so DNA analysis is really not helpful in this case. Blood analysis is much more telling than the DNA. It's amazing how many fiction novels there are out there that the basis of the plot is that the DNA is taken from the shroud and Jesus is cloned. I mean, there's got to be over a dozen of them, but from a scientific point of view, that can't happen. There isn't enough of it, and it's too degraded to be able to do anything with it.
All right, fair enough. So we are still waiting on more people to join the call-in show, including this guy who I've been sort of talking about this entire time. His name is Chuck. Wants to talk about radiocarbon dating. Hopefully we get him on. Hopefully he joins. And Chuck, so if you are listening, this is your time. This is your chance. This is your moment. Do it. Join. Come talk to us. In the meantime, we were talking right before we went live, and this is some sort of bonus content for you guys. If you're interested in the Shroud, you might be interested in this as well. Let's talk about the Orthodox miracle fire. What's the correct term for it?
It's usually called the holy fire. The Greeks, I think, call it the holy light.
Yes.
And it's something that most Western Christians aren't even aware of, but it's existed at least 1700 years, and it happens the same time every year in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on Holy Saturday. So the day before their Easter. And their Easter is usually a little different than ours. It's usually about 2 or 3 weeks later. Now next year, interestingly enough, it coincides. But generally, they're later. And there's reports that there's a bright white light in the church, and all sorts of weird things happen, like the patriarch goes into the tomb. Now the Israeli police and some Muslim families are involved to make sure that there's no lighters or anything that could ignite a lamp that they have in there, as well as the candles that the patriarch carries. 2 sets of candles, 33 to signify the believed age of Jesus, which probably isn't really 33, but that's another story. But he goes into the tomb around 2:00 every Holy Saturday, says a set of prayers, and at some point this sort of blue misty plasma sort of appears in a comes into sort of like a column, and then it starts lighting like the lamps, and then the patriarch lights the candles from the lamp that seems to have been ignited by this blue misty plasma, low temperature, apparently based on some scientific experiments. And then people are waiting in outside of the Edicule, which is a little chapel inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's people in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's people outside the church, and you'll get all these reports of the candles, some of them lighting spontaneously before they're even spread the normal way by the patriarch's original candles, spreading to other people. And there's reports that candles outside the church light spontaneously. It's a really interesting phenomena, and it seems to recall a bit. Oh, another important point is the fact that for about the first 15 to 20 minutes, the light, or the fire rather, does not burn anybody. You can find pictures of people putting the flame to their beard, to their face, to their hair, and they don't burn. It's a low temperature flame, but after about 20 minutes, then it'll take on the characteristics of real fire, and it starts getting hot. Now, Giulio Fanti, the Italian shroud researcher I mentioned before, he did some scientific experiments in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre when he went there in 2019. And he had a control piece of linen, and he put flame from the holy fire about 3 centimeters from the linen, and he also put a regular mat or regular fire, not from the holy fire ceremony. He put both of them up to a piece of linen about 3 centimeters away, and the regular flame burned the cloth. The flame from the holy fire only singed the uppermost fibers of the linen. So some shroud researchers have found that interesting, because one of the interesting characteristics of the shroud is that the image lies only on the top 1 to 2 microfibers of the cloth. It's very superficial. So this suggests that because the experiment showed that the holy fire only singed the control cloth, that the image on the shroud may be something similar. And we have some biblical and historical references to of similar things. We had, Moses came down from the mountain and had to put a veil over his face because it was so bright. He experienced the burning bush, which a fire didn't consume the burning bush. We had the example of the tongues of fire at Pentecost, where the tongues of fire, rested on 120 people in the upper room and didn't burn them. So, of course, this is very exciting to syndenologists, because it gives us maybe a very good clue to that the image can be put into the miraculous category because of these other similar things. So it's when I was out in Colorado this past weekend, and there's a guy that does religious documentaries named L.A. Marzulli, and he only heard of the shroud or not the shroud, excuse me, the holy fire about 6 months ago. And this guy is prodigious in his research. I mean, he's been studying the shroud for 44 years. He's got all sorts of videos and books and articles that he's written on religious topics over the year, and he was blown away by the evidence of the holy fire. And my friend Russ Brault, who just wrote a book on the shroud that includes a chapter on the holy fire, he only found out about it a few months ago when he called another shroud researcher for his books for some input on the book. And the researcher that he called, Robert Siefker, was a co-author on a book about the holy fire with our Italian friend Giulio Fanti. So when Bob Siefker heard that Russ was writing a book, he says, "Oh, you ought to look into the holy fire." So Russ started looking into it himself. I think that was only several months ago. And Russ was blown away by the evidence. And he ended up including the last chapter of his book, includes a chapter on the holy fire. So it's an interesting ceremony. Some of the, again, another similarity with the shroud is that the history, at least early on, is a bit sketchy. But there was a Greek architect named Haris Scarlakitis, I think is his name. He wrote a book, very fine book, that you can find on Amazon, that recounts documented accounts of the holy fire between the 4th and the 17th century. Now, it's continued beyond that, but he just concentrated. He went to libraries all over the world. This guy did research, and the best researchers go all over the world and dig into old manuscripts and find documentation for what they're doing. And he did that. And so but what's surprising is that people in the West are very unfamiliar with it. Despite the fact that it's been going on, a good 1,700 years, and there's numerous accounts of people's accounts of it. Another interesting fact is that I've read that some people see the flame coming out of the tomb where the Eticule, where the patriarch had gone, and some don't, which suggests that there's a faith element to it. But most people experience it, and there's some really interesting historical accounts of Muslims trying to shut it down and stuff, and then they put out the fire and it relights on its own, and they try to get the ceremony stopped, but even Muslims take part in it sometimes, and there's a way they take candle, they have a candle, and they get the holy fire and they bring it to their homes. Even the Muslims, and some mosques have been known to take it to take some of the holy fire, and they find it a fascinating ceremony. So it's something that I think people will be hearing more and more about. Russ just wrote an article in a magazine called Prophecy Watchers magazine. It's basically the same as the last chapter in his book with a few changes to it. But if you Google holy fire, you will see some amazing pictures. You will literally see, these are not Photoshop pictures. I guarantee you, it's people. These are people who are devout Christians and even Muslims, as I say, and they can put that fire anywhere on their body, and it doesn't harm it at all. And some Russians did some experiments in 2008, and they detected a radial pulse. Electromagnetic changes have been detected when the phenomena comes down by other people. So there's been a lot of scientific experiments, and just like with the shroud, science can take you so far, and then you believe it or don't. And if you want to come up with a supposedly rational explanation for it, you're going to find it.
The holy fire is not something I've personally looked into. It was actually brought to my attention first from a patron. Maybe, you know what? Maybe that's not true. Maybe I did see something about it like years ago, and I was just like, I'm not super interested in that at this time. And this was a period of my life where I was looking really deep into the philosophical arguments for the existence of God. And as of late, I've been looking into more these sort of miraculous type claims about the supernatural, personal experiences that people have noted. We've been covering exorcisms on the channel a lot. And now we're starting to look into miracles, and holy fire is actually something on our list to look into and produce some content on that. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to discuss it on the channel today, is to kind of just, I don't know, whet people's appetites and start to get everyone to start thinking about this. The world is a fascinating place, and I think it's really interesting that a lot of people are just very confident about their worldview, and they haven't really studied any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just the world is a very strange place. And I can't wait to look into this stuff further. But we do have a caller lined up, so let's go ahead and pull him in. His name is, let me see if I can pull him up here, Jeffrey Irwin, who says he's a Christian and a self-described shroud enthusiast, and he'd like to discuss an alternative hypothesis with you. So let's see if we can pull him in here. All right, Jeffrey, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
All right, we can hear you. So go ahead and ask your question.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, Joe, for all the hard work you did in putting together this book.
Thank you.
Quite a book.
See if you can put it over a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Other way. There you go, and up a little bit.
There we go.
Yep.
Yeah, as you can see, I've got a lot of bookmarks in there, and I thought it was very useful. I actually wrote a short paper that got published in the Shroud newsletter a year ago, and I cited from this book. Thanks very much, Mr. Marino. I'm sure this was a lot of work.
Yeah, I worked on that, I'd say, about 30 years.
Really?
Well, I gather I didn't start the book, and then it took 30 years. I did a lot of research, and then from about 2016 to about 2020 was really the publishing process. But
thank you very much. I found it useful. And my question is, as I'm sure you're aware, there's an alternative hypothesis that would explain the Shroud's radiocarbon readings. Published, first suggested by Dr. Phillips at Harvard University in 1988, and subsequently expanded on by Robert Rucker. And the evidence that what I'm seeing seems to support the neutron absorption hypothesis, particularly the carbon-14 readings of the Siderium of Oviedo have been done 3 times, all date to 8th century. Then we have the titulum, which is the title board that was on the cross, and that dates to about 890 to 1150 by radiocarbon, also severely skewed, whereas the lettering on it indicates first century. And then we have the tunic, which kind of is even more skewed, dating all the way from 530 to 880 by radiocarbon. So hypothesizing that all these items were in the tomb, they all, Shroud and all these other three items all seem to be skewed severely, suggesting a common influence, which couldn't be reweaving. It would have to be the neutron absorption hypothesis. Mm-hmm. So that's just my observation.
Okay. Yeah.
And, maybe one more thing. We have in the Shroud newsletter of winter 2021, the anomaly in the Shroud blood reported by Giulio Fanti and Michael Kowalski that shows the spectrum of the Shroud blood lacks its nitrogen signature, which would indicate a neutron flux.
Cameron, I've frozen again.
Maybe you would like to comment on that.
Sorry about that, Jeffrey. We're actually going to have to do so. Joe, why don't you go ahead and back out, and Jeff, we'll get you back in just a second. So unfortunately, Joe lost connection again with his webcam, so we'll see if we can get him back in here in just a second. All right, he is joining. I think we're ready to go. Let me see if I can pull him in. Okay, Joe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we got to get you a better webcam for next time. I think we can probably actually send you one. So
actually, my stepdaughter just sent me one that I opened yesterday. So I hopefully next time I'll have that installed.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. Sorry about that, Jeff. Joe, did you get everything there? Because
yes.
Jeff's audio was kind of going in and out, at least for me.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, kind of repeat the question for the audience and then get into your response.
Okay. The question was the contention between the invisible reweaving hypothesis and the neutron absorption hypothesis as explanations for the Shroud severely skewed radiocarbon readings. And the observation was that the cydarium and the titulum and the tunic also show severely skewed radiocarbon readings, which, if they were all in the tomb, would suggest a common influence, which could only be the neutron absorption hypothesis. They couldn't all have been rewoven. And also we have the anomaly in the Shroud blood crust that's reported by Fanti and Kowalski, that shows a lack of nitrogen in the spectrum of the Shroud blood crust, suggesting a neutron flux that could have removed that nitrogen. So those are just my observations. I tend to favor the neutron absorption hypothesis just because of the data there, and because some textile experts like Flurry Lundberg have said that they don't see the reweaving, even though they closely examined the corners of the shroud. And I just don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah.
Or just leave it as an observation.
Yeah. But I mean, Bob and I are friends. I've read all his stuff. He says that the Reweave doesn't fulfill all the requirements, and that his does. All I can say is really his theory or his hypothesis is at this point just speculative. Now it may be borne out with further research. I don't know if we'll have that chance. I hope they do allow further testing. But as far as the Reweave goes, all I know is I've got a lot of data with independent experts that all are saying there appears to be a repair in that area. And so I'm not a textile expert. I'm not a scientist, but what I do very well is connect dots. And because I've read so much of the Shroud material, I've been able to put out data points that need to be analyzed in context and in an overall view of them. And when I've got at least six STERP members, their data showing that C14 corner is anomalous, and it could be radiation is partially involved in that, but in the overall picture of my most recent article on the Reweave, I think it was like 66 pages and like over 100 references. And I have seen some people try to explain some of that data away, some if not all of it. But I think, this is one of those areas that really needs to be further explored. And I just hope, we probably won't have any further testing as long as Pope Francis is around, even though he's got a background in chemistry. You think he'd be ideal to say, hey, let's go in there and do some more chemical tests. But I would point out that Ray Rogers thought that my late wife and I were crazy. He called us, we were part of the lunatic fringe, he said. And then he had samples from the main part of the cloth from 1978 in his possession, which he was allowed to do as part of his STERP work. And he also had some fibers, some threads from what's called the Reyes sample that had been excised in 1973 for Dr. Gilbert Reyes for textile analysis. He had some of those threads, and the C14 sample was taken literally right next to where the Reyes sample had been taken. So when he heard about our hypothesis, he pulled out threads from both areas, and he thought he was going to show us in 5 minutes, prove us wrong. And he found some of the earmarks of a repair, including a spliced linen thread with cotton. Linen, the shroud is linen, but he found cotton in that area, and he says cotton was not found anywhere else on the shroud. So I have a lot of data points and independent researchers that are saying that area seems to have been manipulated, repaired, and or rewoven. And there are many different type of repair techniques that apparently were done over the centuries. So again, so my final my real comment on all that is that further research is going to have to resolve if it's somehow a combination of both, or if it's one or the other, or whatever.
Thank you for addressing my comment, and I think you're exactly right. Further research could easily be accomplished with the remnants that were taken on the 2000 restoration. Where they got.
Yeah, they've got plenty of material to test.
Material taken out that's actually been carbonized. It's perfect for radiocarbon testing. We'll know if that comes out as Rucker predicts to thousands of years into the future, then the hypothesis is verified, and if not, then we would have to look toward yours more. But thank you again for your book, and thanks for answering my comment.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, that's an amazing picture you've got behind you.
That's 2 times, actually, what was the other photographer besides Schwartz?
Miller from 78. Miller.
Yeah, that's one of his photos that was available many years ago, and that's a double size. And I had it blown up at the art gallery.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
All right, Jeffrey, thank you for calling in.
Double size now. Yeah, I've got a lot more.
All right, Jeffrey, thanks again. All right, let's turn now to a super chat. This one is from Yeshua the King. He says, wish Myth Vision and David Falk were here. #tag him. So oddly enough, I don't know if that's odd, but I do actually have Derek from Myth Vision, his phone number. So I actually did literally just text him when this super chat came in. I said, hey, if you're not at Planet Fitness, go ahead and join our stream today. I haven't heard back, so he probably is at Planet Fitness. But Joe, you probably don't know who Myth Vision is, but he's an atheist YouTuber Have you heard of him?
I've seen a YouTube or two of his. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess he's done some work on the Shroud or done some videos on the Shroud. I haven't seen them. But that would be probably a really fun conversation to have. So the line is open if Derek wants to join. Would love to have him here. And then David Falk, I did actually message him before we went live, and he said that he's just not available today, unfortunately. So all right, let's go ahead now and pull in our next guest, and next caller. This one, his name is. Looks like Christian, and he is an atheist or an agnostic who has some similar carbon dating questions to the guy that we scared off. I don't know why he never showed up. Chuck just never showed up. The line is still open if you want to call back in, Chuck, but we've got the next best thing, Christian Davis. Let me see if I can pull him in. Actually, you know what? I haven't asked him to unmute yet, so let me ask him to unmute and get. There we go. Okay,
right,
yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, yeah. So I'm Christian. I'm a agnostic atheist. I guess it depends on how you want to break it down. I guess you can consider me agnostic, leaning more toward atheism. But yeah, I had a question about the carbon dating in relation to the Shroud. So I've looked at a little bit. Now I'm not super read up on it. I'm not an expert, of course, is what I mean. But so the dating puts it somewhere between 1200 and like 350 or something roughly is the carbon dating.
1260 to 1390.
Okay, thank you for the correction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the date that it's been that has been tested for. So I'm just wondering, I've been trying to look into that and look at some potential counter arguments for that, because I'm trying to weigh all the evidence and see what the truth is. So I've been looking into things like the Reweave hypothesis. There was one, I can't remember who the person was, but he had an hypothesis that maybe when the miracle happened, the light radiated from Jesus and it somehow caused more carbon-14 to appear.
Yeah.
So with the carbon-14 results, I guess we'll start with what are some of your contentions with that, I guess?
Well, I don't know if you heard the discussion with the previous caller. He raised
a little bit.
Okay. So he mentioned Bob Rucker, who has the neutron absorption theory, and a friend of mine, Mark Antonacci, has a kind of along those lines, a similar theory. He has a book from 2015 called, it's either Test the Shroud or Testing the Shroud. Mark Antonacci is his last name. That's a very good book to read. That's available on Amazon. I've never been one to try to figure out the exact method of how the image was formed. My bottom line is that I personally believe that the image was caused by what Christians call the resurrection, but that we can't 100% prove that. I think we can get close to it, possibly, if they're given more access to the cloth. But as I explained with the last caller, a more simple explanation of why the dating is off is the Reweave fits that very well. Now, they only took the biggest problem with the C14 was that instead of taking samples from 3 locations, they only took it from 1 location. Okay. And consequently, you don't know if the contamination and or repair aspects are giving you the accurate date. Because if you don't have anything to compare it to, the data point is really useless. And added to that, like I said before, I don't think that the Shroud was a good candidate for carbon dating to begin with, because carbon dating works best if an object has been shielded from the environment, and the Shroud's been exposed to all sorts of contaminants and pollution for over 700 years. So I think for me, there's enough other evidence besides the carbon-14 to warrant believing that it's actually authentic. But I can understand why people give it so much prominence. It's psychologically it's a nice test because you think, oh, well, all I have to do is burn this little piece of cloth in the case of the shroud, read the numbers from the output, and presto, you got a date. But the fact that only had one location used, and it's a dubious sample at best, I just don't think you can put some stock in it. And I think it was on this show last time I said, even if the dating had come out first century, yeah, I would have been, I would have said, oh, that's nice. But if I don't think it's that important of a data point, given that I had 800 pages worth of bad science that was used during the process, and so bad science is bad science, whether they come out with results that you like or that you don't like. So I would have said, well, they came out first century, but based on what they did, I don't think you can really put much stock in it. So
okay. So as kind of a follow-up question to that, I guess. So let's say they had done better testing. They tested multiple points and they come up with whatever their date range was. Or I guess another way to say it is like, imagine we didn't do. Yeah, I'll phrase it that way. Let's say they do the testing again. They come up with the same date. Would that the fact that the result came up with this dating in that medieval period, would that be stronger evidence than the other evidence we have put together? Is what I'm saying is carbon dating potentially stronger evidence than the pollen or these other?
That's a good question. I don't think any one test should outweigh dozens and dozens of others. However, that if they took 3 samples and they all came up with the medieval date, then I think you'd have to would give more credence to the radiation theory as opposed to the Reweave theory, for sure.
Okay, but it like carbon dating wouldn't necessarily, obviously it would never prove, because I don't think you can necessarily prove anything, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that medieval production is more likely, is what you're saying.
I don't have enough faith in carbon-14 to trust it.
Okay.
At least on the shroud. On the shroud.
Right. Okay. No, that's fair enough. Okay. And then so let's go back to if it's okay, what we're talking about, the potential reweave hypothesis, because I think you're correct me if I'm wrong, are you championing like a reweave patch to be potentially the explanation for the current dating? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I need to do a clarification though. Quick.
For sure.
Originally, we used the word patch because that's that's a term that one of the textile experts. We had given 3 textile experts a picture of the Zurich sample, and one of them said he thought it was a patch. So we started using that, but later on, a patch implies 16th century. Coming up against first century, but later, based on what Rogers found, it was more of like a intertwining of individual threads. So we stopped using the word patch. Okay, fair enough. Thank you for the clarification. So I heard you talk about certain cotton fibers be found within the patch, like sewn in, like that would be evidence of a weave as opposed to a patch. Yeah. But it's within the linen. So we've got linen in the sample. We've got some cotton. So are you of the opinion then that like the cotton was the patch, or that it could have been linen and cotton patched in together? Rogers did find in the sample that he had, which was he later did get an authentic leftover sample of the shroud from what was kept in Turin in after 1988. And he did find cotton interspliced, interwoven with the linen. So and even Arizona and Oxford both reported in their reports and documentation that they found traces of cotton in their samples as well.
Okay. Do we know if like the amount of cotton that was in there? Because that's one thing I'm looking into. If we think that the cotton, I guess you didn't state that specifically, but do you think then that the reweave was just cotton, or if it would have been cotton and linen mixed together, that would have been rewoven into there?
Right, cotton and linen. I don't have any
okay.
Real figures or percentages type of thing. It's just, yeah.
Okay, that was just my question, because I've had people mention that it was like a cotton was rewoven into there, and that's just so. I guess my next question is like, how do we find evidence of it being rewoven in there? I know we talked about finding bits of cotton in there, but aside from, I suppose, the cotton, which could be good evidence for it, like, is there like, do textile experts see where like the lines of them are? Because I'm of course I'm no expert, but I've looked at what some textile experts have said for like this, like I think it was like an invisible reweave. I think it was like a French method, and it does leave some traces on one side. On like the other side, you can have some telltale signs that it was woven, but on the, let's call it the outside, it's pretty hard to tell, if not impossible, definitely for a layman. But a textile expert could look on the opposite side and see these bits of where the fabric was woven in. Is there evidence of that on the shroud? I don't think I've seen that personally.
I addressed that in my most recent article. I have 2 citations that suggest that it is possible to disguise the fact on both sides that it's been rewoven. I would suggest you read my most recent article, which I think it's called "Further Empirical Evidence for the Reweave of," I forget the title, but you can find it on my academia page. If you have trouble finding it, I'll just give you my email right here, and I can send you the link. Are you able to take my email down and remember it?
Unfortunately, I can't take notes right now. I'm kind of I'm over my car right now, so I apologize. I'll try to message in the YouTube chat or something, so that perhaps Cameron or somebody could send me something, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll send you the. If I'll need a Facebook, I can't put a link in a YouTube comment. They won't allow it. Let's see.
No, I can get that to you. Yeah, I can get you his contact info. That's no problem.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I have one. I guess I'll call it my last question, and maybe it's covered in that material you just linked. So just let me know if it's in that material. But you talked about how there's evidence or whatever that the reweave could happen and it not be able to be seen even by experts.
Right.
How could I, if that's the case, how can you then tell the difference between a cloth that is rewoven and a cloth that was just woven originally? How do you tell the difference if it's invisible even to experts?
Well, in some cases, unless you're a super expert, you'd have to use other implements. I mean, some experts might be able to tell with the naked eye. Most people would probably need optical equipment to discern it.
Okay.
I see. But yeah, that's all covered in my article.
Okay. Well, then sorry for asking a redundant question.
No problem.
But thank you for your time. I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling in, Christian.
Yeah,
all right.
No
let's go ahead and pull in our next caller. And it looks like we've got Patrick lined up. I don't see his camera on, but we do actually have another guy named Clark who's actually been, he's called in. Oh, there we go. Okay, we've got Patrick here. Okay, so it is Patrick. That's his name, Patrick. It looked like it was Pete for a second. Let me ask him to unmute, and we'll get him pulled into the show. And Patrick looks like he's got some questions about other instances of shroud-like faces in history. All right, can you hear us?
I
Patrick?
can hear you loud and clear. You're coming
Perfect.
through. Can you hear me?
Yep, everything's great.
I'm on a microphone as well, which is kind of cool. It's kind of neat. It's almost like I'm a guest on the show versus a caller. It's almost like I'm the special guest. Can you even imagine that, though? So I had a question. By the way, Bertuzzi last name, very famous hockey last name as well.
Yes, it is. I mean, some people know that. People, in the United States, hockey isn't that big, so a lot of people don't know that. But yeah, Bertuzzi, if you search it up, I guess nowadays you will find me, but you also will find Todd Bertuzzi, and then his son. What's his son's name?
His son's name is Tyler Bertuzzi. And
Tyler, that's right.
And actually, hockey is getting kind of big in Florida. We just won the Stanley Cup of hockey, so we're kind of getting into it around here nowadays. But I will get to it. And your name's Cameron. What's the guy's name who I'm talking with?
Who, Joe?
Like
the expert. His name is Joe Marino.
Oh my goodness. Talk about sports last names. I mean, this is getting outrageous. That's another one that's very famous. No, in all seriousness, though, I had a question about. I am big into the internet. I go on the internet a lot, and the other day I was on the internet searching around, doing what I usually do and everything, and I started thinking about the concept of a modern day Shroud of Turin, and because what ended up happening was I was watching some of my videos that I love to watch, some of my favorite videos, and batching off, and I ended up busting a rope out onto a cloth, and the rope that I busted sort of formed what looked like the face of Mother Mary a little bit. My seed that I spilled onto the cloth. I ejaculated onto the cloth, and
Okay, this guy is just trolling. Okay, so let's pull in. It looks like we do have someone actually else lined up. His name is Clark. So let's go ahead and see if we can pull him in here. Man, the trolls never stop coming, do they? Clark. Let's see if we can pull him in here. Sorry, guys. All right, Clark, you've been on the show before, so I actually don't see your question here, but go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I actually had a question regarding this book. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Lavoie's research on the Shroud.
Yeah.
And it's not a question so much as I'm late to the stream, so maybe you already touched on this, but in his book, something that was really interesting was the talk about the pollen grains that they found, and apparently someone did an extensive analysis on that and found, pollen grains native to plants only from the Jerusalem area, but also some, I think, in like Constantinople maybe, and then in France, which some use as a way to kind of track, I guess, the journey of the Shroud. And also he comments that something I never thought about before I read this book, but if the image was created from the cloth being draped across the face of the man, well, when you fold that, the image would be distorted, but the proportions are not distorted. Therefore, the image is not formed by skin contact. And I thought that was something really interesting. But the blood stains, you can tell they are because of the draping of it was created by skin contact. The image itself was not. It was as if, he says that as if the body was levitating or suspended in air with the cloth outstretched at the time that image was formed. So I was wondering if you could just talk about, those two things.
Yeah, we discussed the pollen with an earlier caller. The geographical indications of the pollen do suggest that it was in Jerusalem at some point. So if that's the case, the idea of a European medieval forgery kind of goes out the window, unless you want to posit, like I said before, you could posit that the medieval European forger went to the trouble of procuring a Middle Eastern cloth, which, unlikely, but you have to be open to them, to do that. But the pollen does suggest areas that the shroud has been in Turkey, and there's pollens from Italy and France where it's been. So I think the pollen analysis can give us very good clues. But as I said previously, much more research needs to be done to firm some of that up. As far as you're absolutely right. If it can't be, the image can't be full contact, because if the cloth is molded to the face, and whatever substance on there or whatever causes the face to form, once you fold out the cloth, you're right, that the face would be distorted. So it can't be a contact image for the image. Now the blood is image, and it is apparent that the blood went on first and then the image, which makes sense because there's no image underneath the blood. And what medieval artist is going to put the blood on first and then do the image? I mean, nobody would ever dream of doing that. So many years ago, the late Dr. John Heller from the STURP team said that he thought that there could have been some sort of like he said 1 million lasers emitting like a laser light beam out of each pore of the body simultaneously in vertical collimation, meaning that it goes straight up and straight down, and that would overcome the cloth being molded to the face. But Dr. Lavoie, I think, has a good point. You would think, physically, scientifically speaking, that in order for that to be the case, that the cloth would have had to kind of been taut or stretched out, so that when it did collimate up and down, that the cloth was stretched out, and so that the face could then be proportional based on the million laser beams sort of collimating up and down from the radiation. So I think that's a possibility. Otherwise, if there wasn't something along those lines, you would have that problem of having a distorted face. So, and there's no natural explanation that there's no pigment, paints, dye, stain, pigmentation of any kind. The image is only on the top 1 to 2 microfibrils, and it's uniform across the front and back, all over the cloth. And so you would need, there's no technology today that could reproduce that. So I think you kind of, when all the natural, like Sherlock Holmes said, once you eliminate all the possibilities, whatever's left's the answer, no matter how strange it seems. So in the case of the shroud, since it appears that no natural explanation works, some sort of radiation with vertical collimation seems to be the best answer.
Yeah, and he also spoke of, I guess they found imprints of certain plants on the shroud.
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, there's the pollen and the botany. There's been a lot on that, and it's possible that some of the botanical remnants could be, if the shroud was used in a liturgy, or if he was buried with flowers. Some people would contend that wouldn't have been part of a Jewish burial. Other people believe that it could have been. There's a lot of unknowns, but the botanical and pollen analysis is very useful in some areas, and again, I almost finish each section by saying, we need further testing on it, because we do. I mean, the last major testing was in 1978, and that's eons ago. I mean, science and technology have advanced so much since 1978, and I find it amazing that as much new research has been done since 78 with no new hands-on testing.
Yeah, one other thing, if I can take a little more time, that I thought was interesting was, he in that book, he goes into, I guess, the Jewish burial traditions. And so criticism was, why didn't they wipe the blood off of, the Jesus before they would bury him? And actually, I guess if a Jewish person is dying and blood is leaving their body as they are actively dying, the tradition is not to clean the body because the life is in the blood. So they keep that.
Correct.
And I worked in the hospital, and during COVID, a nurse that I worked with said in Israel, patients that were on ECMO, they would actually bury them with the blood from the ECMO tubing as part of the burial, because that's just how the Jews did it. So anyways, I found interesting. And
they had their rules, but there were exceptions for Jews that experienced a violent death, and there were 4 exceptions, and Jesus fulfilled all 4 of those.
Okay, well, thanks for taking the time to discuss this with me.
Thank you.
All right, Clark.
For your work and everything you do.
Thanks for calling in, man.
Sorry about that.
I appreciate you.
Sorry about that last caller who was trolling.
No worries.
I'll pray for him.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. I mean, it is wise to pray for people like that. I was gonna say some other things, but that's a much wiser thing to do. Praying is a much wiser thing. So, but Clark, I definitely appreciate you calling in again, and hopefully we'll see you again in another show. So, thanks.
I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you, Clark.
Okay, Joe, why don't we go ahead and start to wrap things up? We've been going about 2 hours in the call-in show, so this would be a pretty good time to wrap things up. Why don't we get a quick summary from you? I mean, we talked about it earlier on in the show, your reasons for thinking that the Shroud is authentic. So maybe we can, at the end of this, start to kind of recap some of those, and then also feel free to talk about any sort of new things that are happening with the Shroud.
Okay. Well, I think, there are just so many interesting image characteristics. My friend Mark Antonacci, I think, has in his book something like 38 unique characteristics of the Shroud image. And you have to look at it in the context, was there really anybody capable? Even, some people say Da Vinci did it, but the problem with that theory is that the Shroud existed for 150 years before Da Vinci was even born. So unless, he invented a time machine and used it to transport himself, that theory goes out the window. You get all sorts of strange theories with the Shroud. You get it just like your caller. I mean, you get the most devout people all the way down to people who are just having fun or trying to have fun. The Shroud does attract lots of different kinds of people. Let's put it that way. So what else? I mean, just
well, one other thing, if I can kind of just maybe prompt you in this way, that one of the things you said earlier that I think is something that I think a lot about the Shroud, because as like I'm a non-expert, I've interviewed people on this topic, but it's not something that we've done like a deep dive on it. I haven't really put a whole lot of research into this topic personally. But the things that I hear, I mean, people are kind of bringing up like the pollen issues and other different, there's a lot of different things. You mentioned this. There's like a lot of sort of cumulative evidence that sort of, you get more and more of it. This is something that J. Warner Wallace talks a lot about, obviously, in his book as a cold case detective. I don't know if you're familiar with him or his story. But yeah, I mean, he'll say that like, I'm trying to think of the term that he uses for a type of evidence. It's a very common term. I just can't think of it. It's not popping in my head right now. But it's basically for a piece of evidence that can kind of go both ways. So like, suppose that someone gets accused in a murder, and an eyewitness sees someone with some red shoes on. And then these guys think that this guy's the murderer. They go into his house and they see some red shoes in his house. Like, that's evidence. It could go both ways. It could be like, okay, I mean, other people might have red shoes, so that doesn't prove that he's the killer necessarily. But if you start to add all these things together, then it just becomes increasingly unlikely that it fits all of these different things so nicely. And you might be able to explain each case away.
Yeah.
Just like you can explain away, like, finding shoes that this person has. You can explain that away. It was just a coincidence he had these same shoes. But once you add things together, it starts to become like, okay, well, actually, no, it does kind of seem to fit the bill. And I also like your stance on this. Kind of shifting to a different point, is that you're not taking a stance on the way or some sort of method that the image was created on the shroud. I think that's probably the best route to take, given what I know about it. It's like no one knows how it was made, and so to even like offer a theory at this point, it seems almost better to just not do that. We don't know how the image was created. It's just an amazing relic. And maybe this last thing, and you can just come in and comment and share whatever thoughts you've got. One of the things that really fascinated me about the image on the shroud, and we've talked about this a little bit, is how thin it is, how thin that image is on the linen. It's I don't even know the numbers, and I'm sure you can inform us on the actual numbers here, but it's so thin that's one of the reasons why people can't duplicate it. It's because when you use something like paint, it's going to go all the way through, and you're going to see it all the way. Yeah, and the image that we see though is just so thin that it's like, how did anyone do this? We don't know. Yeah. And then we also like combine that with the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, we were talking, or one of the callers was talking about blood, or I think it was a super chat, was talking about the blood on the shroud. And in those instances, it really acts like true blood, like it's seeped all the way through in those areas where the blood is. But then when you look at the image, it's still really superficial, in contrast to the blood that soaked through, like exactly what you would expect of something like that, or even like a paint, that's similar properties would have an effect on the shroud as paint and blood. So yeah, anyways, feel free to comment on any of that. But yeah, I mean, this thing is just fascinating.
Well, another interesting thing is not only is it uniform and superficial front and back all around, through the whole images, both images, you will find some one thread right next to another that's been affected. There might be one right next to it that doesn't have the superficiality. That's another added layer of complexity. You see what I'm saying? I mean,
so the image is very sharp, is what you're saying.
It's very sharp, but it's not found on every single fiber. So okay. And so where the areas that look darker,
the edges aren't sort of blurred.
There's no outline, actually. That's another point against an artist. Usually an artist starts with an outline and then fills it in. The shroud image has no outline to it, but there are some threads within the degraded area, the fiber where the fibers are degraded, where some of the threads literally were not degraded. So you have a fiber that's degraded, and then the thread right next to it might not be. But it is uniform all over front and back of the cloth, but with some fibers that weren't affected for some reason. I don't know the explanation for that, but that's another point of saying an artist is not going to be able to do that. I mean, you can't even do the superficiality aspect. How do you add to that discoloring some fibers or threads, but not others? It's impossible. To me, it's just the medieval forger theory is just so preposterous that it almost by itself makes me jump to that it's probably a supernatural explanation.
Because I mean, one of the theories you might put together is that, well, with these individual fibers that don't have the image on it, you could say, well, maybe what they did was they just weaved it in such a way is that when they put it all like they colored the fibers individually and then they wove it together in like to look like the image. But that is also going to be almost impossible to do because on the image is literally on the surface, so they'd have to get the fibers perfectly aligned when they were sort of weaving it through, which is basically impossible.
Yeah, I agree. It's another, no matter. I mean, every natural technique that you can think of has been thought of to this point, and none of them get the physics and the chemistry right. None of them. And in order to have the physics and chemistry work together, simultaneously without discrepancies, it basically does require something beyond the natural.
What do you think about this? That just sort of occurred to me in terms of like, can we get any kind of, well, maybe this would be better put in terms of like reasons to think that it's authentic. So one of the reasons you might appeal to is that this actually just kind of matches what we find in other miracle reports. Like one of the things that you've got to one of the criteria for establishing that some miracle occurred is that there is no likely naturalistic explanation. And so the fact that this very closely obviously meets that criteria, it obviously meets that criteria. Like we don't have a good natural explanation of how this thing occurred. So the fact that it sort of matches that criteria gives us some evidence that it's like some miraculous type thing occurred to it. What do you think about that?
Right. Well, one of the questions I often get and other shroud researchers get is why doesn't the church proclaim it as authentic? And it's important to remember that the church will never, as a matter of rule, never pronounces on the authenticity of relics. They may give their opinion or whatever, but in the case of the shroud, the Pope John Paul II said that the church wasn't competent enough to make a decision on its own about the authenticity and that science had to do it. But the church is never going to say the shroud's authentic. It's not a matter of dogma or morals to believe in the authenticity of a relic. The most they will do is, if they know a relic is fraudulent, they will not allow veneration of it. So the very fact that despite the C14 results of 1988, they've allowed 3 exhibitions says that the church does not actually accept science's verdict that it dates to 1260 to 1390, because if they believe that, they wouldn't be having these exhibitions. So they kind of leave it open. They call it an icon and a relic, but there's been over 30 popes that have expressed their individual opinion that the shroud's authentic, but they're really, when they say that, they're really speaking as just as an individual and not as the Pope and being head of the church. So they leave it open to the faithful to decide. And I'm disappointed they don't use it more to try for evangelization and trying to reach people. I mean, they're in the business of trying to save souls, and they got this object that has moved millions of people already, and they keep it hidden away. I know they've got other matters on the situations that they need to deal with constantly, but I think they're a little gun shy because they had a part in the failure of the 1988 dating because of some of the decisions they made. And then they did a secret restoration in 2002, which was a disaster because they did it without consulting bona fide scientists. Right after John Paul says, well, we're not competent to deal with it fully from a scientific point of view. And yet they went in secretly and got some of their own experts to, whoever heard of restoring quote, a relic. I mean, they actually ruined some good scientific evidence on the shroud when they quote restored it in 2002. So I think they're a little gun shy of doing more testing. I mean, people, the 3 exhibitions they've had since the 1988 dating, they've still had millions of people come. So the C14 dating didn't dissuade people from coming in. So they probably figure, well, why stick our necks out? If we ever do put it on exposition, we're gonna get millions of people, and if we do allow more testing, we run the risk of screwing something up again. I hate to be that say that, but I think there's some truth to that.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the big reasons why we're probably not in our lifetimes going to see it tested again at the level that it was, which is unfortunate because, I mean, that's what a lot of people want to see. Yeah. But I mean, one thing that you pointed out earlier that I hadn't personally thought of is that there are other alternative explanations that people can give. If it does come back with a first century dating, like, okay, that person took a first century cloth and made it from that. And then, so how much credence does that actually give us to think that this thing is the authentic burial cloth, given some of the other facts about it? And so, like you said, people can kind of, if they're determined enough, they can believe whatever they want.
You know what? I had a guy I watched a YouTube video, and there were a lot of the comments on it were negative. And one guy put in a comment that Stirp had never published anything, which is just absurd. It was on Shroud.com. All of the papers that Stirp published have been on Shroud.com forever. So I wrote a comment and I corrected him, or I said, the papers are available on Barry Schwartz's website, which unfortunately Barry passed away, and I'm now the new editor of that. But I said that they were available, and he doubled down in a reply to me and said they never published anything and that I needed to do more research. I mean, people can just make up stuff and they just live in their own world with their explanations. I think it's because the shrouds scares people, basically.
Your first mistake was to go into the YouTube comment section. That was your first mistake.
Probably.
I mean, as a YouTuber, I'm like, sometimes I'll read through the comments and I'm like, oh man, this is what I do for a living.
Yeah.
I create content and then it promotes people to leave these sorts of comments, which is true of any YouTube channel. I mean, I think that's just like, it doesn't matter how, academic you try to be, you're going to invite people, especially, I mean, we're talking about a topic that just polarizes people. And so it's to me, it's sort of expected. But Joe, why don't we go ahead and start to wrap things up? I know that you were traveling and you're probably tired. You're ready to maybe even take a nap.
Absolutely.
But this was great. I really appreciate you coming on such sort of late notice, because I think you just finished like a board meeting right before you came on.
I did
for Shroud.com. So
yeah,
you've busy man.
Could I mention, we're one of the things we talked about is to continue Barry Schwartz's legacy. I mean, the man was amazing. I was at his house with his son last Saturday, and it's a Shroudy's dream house. I mean, I was just in awe of all the things he had and what he was doing, working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for years, trying to keep up with it. But there's some information on Shroud.com right now about him. We're still in the process of revamping that. We're going to be asking for some donations soon because we're going to have to move all the massive amount of material from his house to different centers and individuals around the country to preserve it, because it's just invaluable. And we just, we might throw out a few odd things here and there that might not be valuable, but 95% or more of his collection are things that should be kept for Shroud researchers of the future. So I really appreciate it when you have some time to go to Shroud.com and read the messages there. And if you feel moved to do it, make a donation to Stera to help fund our work, because it's a source that has been around since 1996. It's older than Google, people use it constantly. It's got a great search engine that only searches on Shroud.com and not wider than that. And it's an indispensable source, and we want to keep that source going, but we need donations to help keep it going. So if your viewers are open to that, we'd love to see them visit the site and donate.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you mentioning that. I mean, these types of shows, obviously, if you're interested in this topic, you're probably going to be interested in maybe helping out Shroud.com. So it's a perfect opportunity to mention that. And I too, I mean, my interest in the Shroud is growing as of late, and so I also will help donate and make sure that you guys are
thank you. Appreciate
continuing to flourish. So yeah, and I know that you're also, now that you're the editor of Shroud.com, you've taken on another workload in addition to trying to figure out what to do with all of these different pieces of evidence about the Shroud and stuff. Like you've got a lot on your plate. So yeah, I want to help you guys out, and hopefully the people in the audience can also appreciate that, and we'll go there. I mean, it's also a great website, super easy to go to, just shroud.com. Like, just go type it in your browser and go there and donate, and hopefully we can help you guys out and make sure that everything that Barry was doing is going to be preserved.
Yeah,
so
thank you,
Joe. Thanks for coming back on.
And I wish you the best of luck with your channel. You have some very interesting topics. Can I tell you one last little tidbit that you'll like, related to exorcisms? I'm not particularly into exorcisms, but I know you've done some shows and stuff, and I think you'll find this interesting. When I was in my early 20s, I did a retreat in St. Louis, which is my hometown, by some Jesuits, a retreat center called the White House. And one of the priests I had was a Jesuit priest. I think his last name was spelled Mazza, Father Mazza. Another nice Italian boy. And I remember this. He told us, if you don't believe in the devil, let me back up. He was involved in the exorcism of the boy in St. Louis that the movie The Exorcist was based on. That's an important point. So he was a young priest at the time. Wasn't the main priest, but he assisted in some of the exorcisms. And Father Mazza said to our retreat group, if you don't believe in the devil, you would if you saw what I saw. And I don't remember really, he might have given us a few more details, but I've always remembered that line from 40 years ago or something. Have you had Father Carlos Martin? I think you had Father Carlos Martin on your show. Yeah. He supposedly he was given a thread of the shroud, and I think he placed it on the person, and the person went into the position of the shroud, the hands and the feet, and the person couldn't move. I think that's what
someone that he was dealing with that was possessed.
Yeah.
Oh wow. So no, he hasn't told that story.
Ask him about it next time you have him.
Okay, I will. Yeah, some connections there might be interesting. Yeah, I've had on Dr. Richard Gallagher, Vincent Lampert, Adam Bly, a lot of very interesting people. Most recently, I had on Father. His name is completely. I'm blanking on his name. I interviewed someone, literally, Farreau, I think is his name. James Farreau. James or John. Man, I'm really bad with names, but it's bad timing to be bad with names. Like when I'm trying to
just wait till you get to my age. Yeah, the memory gets worse. Believe me, my short-term memory is so bad now.
Oh gosh, that stinks.
But
yeah, no, the exorcism stuff is just insane. It really is. I mean, some of the stuff that you hear from these guys, it's like, okay, that's impossible. Well, obviously, naturally impossible for someone to walk backwards up a wall, for them to walk on a ceiling, for them to know ancient language, like dead ancient languages, and to know them fluently and perfectly, for them to know information about what other people are doing and where they are, and intimate details about their personal lives and stuff. And it's like, all of this stuff is there's no natural explanation for it. And so what do you do with that information once you're confronted with it? I mean, I think a lot of people are just not very skeptical of this stuff by nature. Like a lot of people sort of want to believe in this weird, wacky stuff that we're hearing from exorcists, but it's the skeptics that come on and are like, no, this stuff is silly, it's fake, it's dumb. And then the explanations that I see from them are just so bad. Yeah. They're just so ridiculous. Like they're not even giving explanations as to what might be happening. What they've got to do is offer an explanation like the priest is lying. But they're not willing to do that. It's very hard to call these guys liars, literally liars. It'd be a better explanation if you said like they were all maybe hallucinating. I mean, it's just, but even then it's like super difficult to do. Like it's really difficult to come up with a natural explanation. Once you get past the stigma, which is like what a lot of the comments that I see and stuff on these interviews, like the intellectual comments, is really like just parroting what the stigma is. The stigma is it's dumb, it's silly. You guys can probably hear my dog barking in the background. My kids are in the pool right now, and everyone's going crazy. But anyways, let me finish my point here. The basically all they do, the atheists and the naturalists in the comment section will just be like, yeah, this is so dumb, it's silly, people still believe in this kind of stuff. And I'm like, actually most of the world does. So you're in the minority, and then you don't really have any reasons to be in the minority. You just want to say, kind of like with the whole UFO phenomenon, like people want to approach that and just be like, well, there's a stigma on it, and so it's like we shouldn't take it seriously, and any kind of testimony we get on it is dumb as well, and it's all silly. And it's like, okay, that doesn't seem like the right way to approach this intellectually. Like intellectually, what we want to do is actually determine like, okay, what are the probabilities involved here? What is the probability that alien life exists? What is the probability that this person is telling the truth or lying? And then that's what you go on. You don't like, sort of latch onto the stigma that exists and then just like discount any evidence that you see that goes against what you already believe. And so if we approach it rationally, intellectually, then it's pretty interesting. It's pretty difficult to just explain away. And I think there's a lot of similarities between that kind of stuff and the Shroud. So I appreciate you making that connection there.
Yeah, and like Gary, Dr. Habermas says, our beliefs are affected more by our worldview than by facts. So that's why you get all the strange intellectual, jump hooping, strange explanations, I think. You know what we should do is put you in dialogue with Habermas about this. Are you guys friends, or? We're friends. Yeah. Okay. So he knows you. He might be willing to do that right now. Obviously, if you're friends with him, you know that he's writing this super long book on I got the resurrection and stuff. Yeah. So he's been extremely busy with that, and every time I've invited him on to come do additional shows, he's just like, no, I'm just too busy. No, I'm too busy. No, I'm too busy. But maybe if he knows that it's with you, maybe he'd be interested. Oh, I'd love to come on with him. He's great. Okay, cool. All right, we'll try to set something up. But Joe, okay, I'll take enough. I've taken enough of your time. Go get some sleep. Go get some rest. All right. Thanks for joining me again, Joe. Yeah, enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me. All right. See. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?